Hey everyone, this is Devin of the Mystical Solutions to Modern Love, and it is a switcheroo today, only for me, to be quite honest with you. I had done a webinar yesterday that was all about my day job. I'm not going to get too much into it, but it's about traveling, and it is fun, and I am a huge travel fan. I hope that you're doing it on a regular basis, and but now I'm switching to love and problems of romance, and how does Kabbalah solve that problem? I know you want to know, and I am so gonna tell you. Today we are descending the tree, as we have been for the last number of weeks. We are now in an area what is called the sphere of Hod, which means splendor or empathy, depending on how the translation works. You're going to hear splendor more in, shall we say, the Golden Dawn circles. You're a little bit more likely to hear empathy in, shall we say, the Kabbalah, the traditional Kabbalah of Jewish mysticism that is spelled with a K. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both of those things, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about my interpretation of it, and then we are going to answer the million-dollar question, which is, what does this have to do with my love life? And it's important because the problem with Kabbalah is that it's a little bit heady. The heady part of it is that there's all of this is a complicated system. The tree of life, it sort of cross to it in so many different ways. Hold on. My cat knocked off the clip to my lavalier so you can hear me, so we're going to go best 2 out of 3 that. And so we're back, clip free, all working. So to reiterate, we're going to talk a little bit about Hod from the Kabbalah with the K perspective. And again, these are huge subjects, so I'm just going to give you like a little tiny taste of it, something that you can take. And ultimately, I think the important part is, what does this have to do with you, which is really the crux of the game. So let's just jump right in. The orange sphere of Hod is the lowest form of receiving. Remember, we have a giving pillar, we have a one that receives, and then we have this center sort of, shall we say, balanced column that is a little bit more conscious of both. So Hod in the sort of more traditional term, as a matter of fact, I was just reading Rabbi David Cooper earlier today, and he describes Hod as sort of like the child, sort of like this kind of pure form. It is the form of receiving that is at sort of like the base of the tree of life. Remember, furthest away from God, very, kind of like more in the manifestation. And it is about receiving sort of like all of the universe. We're going to get to the foundation next week in Yesod, but understand that all this stuff that is going on in the universe, all of it that is being sent to us from the higher spheres, all of the intellectualization, all of the philosophy, all of the love, all of the not love, all of that stuff kind of settles in Hod, because it's really the lowest form of receiving, where everything sort of collects. On the plus side, that means this sort of, as David Cooper describes it, as Rabbi Cooper describes it, it's sort of like this child that can sort of receive everything, and it's very pure. As a matter of fact, as we talked about last week, Netzach, the opposite, it's sort of its linear opposite, is sort of like the domineering parent, sort of like in sort of giving everything. And so The child is this pure form that's receiving it. And that's a great, like all of these spheres, they're all great and wonderful manifestations of the divine. And that is beautiful. Mwah! The occultist variation of that tends to look at Hod as a form of like it's our intellect. In other words, this whole sort of bottom triangle here has to do with sort of like the personal self, sort of like the parts of us in a practical way, which means, you know, the further up the tree, more we climb towards unity, more towards the bottom of the tree, we deal with notions of separation and chaos and distortion, and it becomes more about the bits and pieces. So Hod think of it as the intellectual side of things. It's how we think and understand the universe through intellect. Now, the downside of intellect is that you really sort of like, you know what you know based on specific subjects, where everything kind of gets dissected across. So the important thing to understand, in the way I tend to look at Hod, is less in an esoteric sense, but more in a practical sense. And the practical sense is that our intellect has definite limitations to it. And it has to do with when we intellectualize things, the pieces get smaller and smaller and smaller, and we get more and more specific. Science is great at labeling things. It doesn't always understand things. I mean, I love science, and I think it's important, and I hope we keep delving and learning more mysteries. But part of that process is labeling things to the smaller and smaller and smaller degree. And so as the lowest form of receiving, I would argue, just as the lowest form of giving has less to do with giving than it does about giving in order to receive something that's more about a negotiation. The example that I use is if I say that I love you, and really what I'm hoping to accomplish is to have you say I love you back, that would be giving in order to receive. Like, I'm going to benefit by giving you something. Like when my daughter wanted animal crackers, crying and kicking her feet in the shopping cart, I could give her the animal crackers under the masquerade of, oh honey, I love you, here's some animal crackers, but really I just want you to stop yelling and screaming in the store. So that's not really about love, and it's not really about giving. So that lowest form of giving is really more about getting, and sort of the lowest form of receiving is less about receiving and more about disintegration, taking pieces to endlessly smaller and smaller pieces, which is part of receiving. But in a practical sense, when we start examining the details endlessly, we never get to a solution of any kind. And so how does that, so the main question is, what does this have to do with my love life? Think of it as this way. When we talk about the sort of like lower four spheres, we're talking about our physicality, and we're talking about our individual selves, how we perceive the world through our physical being, our different filters, whether that be emotion, sort of our routine, whether that be our intellect or our physical body. So when we talk about Hod, we're really talking about this intellectualization of characteristics and details and information, and all that's wonderful. So what does it have to do with our lives? That means when you put two people together in a room, let's call them a husband and wife, or two husbands, or two wives, or however, whatever your circumstance is. If you're dealing with two separate bodies of two people that are constantly dealing with these lower forms, here we're going to get into a lot of details. In other words, she said this and I disagree, and how dare you say that? And then we get caught up with mood and tempo and all these tiny little details. And the more details that we deal with our partners, the less likely we're actually going to deal with them in terms of love and helping them achieve the kinds of things that they want, like happiness and affection and contentment and peace and unity. what we end up doing is getting caught up in a game that has to do with the smaller bits and pieces of detail. So what I would suggest, because we're dealing with the lowest form of receiving, that when we start getting caught up in the details, start really looking towards the unity. You want to get out of the details. Like if you are a guy, the last thing that you probably want to do is go to your, and by the way, this is really good advice. I use it regularly myself. If you're a guy and you are having your woman who is having some stuff, because we have stuff, but we deal with our stuff differently than women do. So when women are dealing with their stuff, and it may be over some very small details, the last things that we actually want to do is start analyzing why they're having feelings about those details. Like, don't do that, because then they're not going to feel love. Your job is to help them feel love, peace, contentment, which are all higher up on the tree. So when she's in the middle of her stuff, that means you try to be of love and service as best you can without saying, because we're good at that. Like men are much more like, well, let's hash it out and let's come to a thing. And if she's in the middle of having some stuff, the last thing you want to do is she's reacting in the moment, and that's a wonderful thing. Sometimes as guys, we don't necessarily understand that. And so what our feeling is, okay, this person we love is having feelings. We want to remove them from their feelings so we can calm the situation down and deal with it the way a boy would deal with it. We're not women. So, I think you're much better off of being complete love and service. And if she's in the middle of the feelings, she needs her space or she doesn't need her space, you love her, hold her hand. That's my suggestion. And it's worked wonders in the relationships I've had with women. It's not just romantic relationships either. These are just how do I be of support to women who are in my life. So that's my suggestion. Don't overanalyze. I mean, again, to receive purely is a wonderful thing because that's what's happening in Hode. But when we analyze it, and we start taking all this stuff that we're receiving and start doing too much with it, we start losing sight of what it is that we're receiving. So be of love, be of service, and that's what I got for this week. We are going to talk about Yesod next week, the foundation. That's some pretty cool stuff. Anyway, I hope you had fun. Oh shoot, I wanted to get into something about Mercury and its connection to Hode. You know what? I'm going to save it for next week, or I may write it down in my post on devingallaudet.com, which, if you don't know, you should be joining, liking, be part of my newsletter, find out all that good stuff. You're going to see it right here at devingallaudet.com. If you're watching me live, you're not going to see a darn thing. But later, there's going to be a beautiful, nifty banner with my name, and you will know how to track me down. So thank you so much for being here, and many blessings to you all. Much love. Mwah. And have a great day. Find love. Lots.